Just in the nick of time. Good evening and welcome to the Planning Commission meeting of October 1st, 2020. My name is Gary Hirsch and I'm the chairperson of the commission. The Planning Commission is a citizen body appointed by City Council. The commission is empowered to make final decisions on certain matters, with those being appealable to City Council. On other matters, the commission acts in an advisory role to council, with the council making the final decision. You'll have an opportunity to address the commission during the public hearing portion of the meeting, and your testimony is greatly appreciated and encouraged. The commission does act from a written agenda. You will need to fill out a yellow speaker card and give it to city staff if you wish to speak on an item this evening. Copies of the agenda and speaker cards are located on the table just inside the entry to the Civic Center here. At this time, I'll ask that you please silence your cell phones and other electronic devices. Thank you. There are 7 members appointed to the Planning Commission. At this time, I'll ask the commissioners to introduce themselves and state the district that they're representing, starting from my far right.
Left?
Left or right?
You.
Right.
I'm Ed Nyberg, representing the Cholla District.
Good evening, I'm Vern Crow, representing Cactus.
Al Lennox, Vice Chair, representing the Beryl District.
Rick Harper, representing Saguaro District.
Martin Nowakowski, representing Yucca District.
And is Commissioner Wilfong phoned in? Okay, we do not have Commissioner Wilfong, so let the record show that all members of the Planning Commission are present, with the exception of Commissioner Wilfong. The Planning Commission receives staff assistance and guidance from the Planning Division and the City Attorney's Office. Ms. Collins, would you please introduce city staff that are present this evening?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Diana Figueroa, our Planning Management Assistant, is to my left. To my right is Jim Gruber. He is our Senior Assistant City Attorney. Edward Vigil, planner that will be presenting this evening, is with us, and also Tabitha Perry, the Special Projects Executive Officer, will also be making a presentation. And my name is Lisa Collins. I'm the Interim Development Services Director. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Is there anyone in the audience that wishes to speak on an item not on tonight's agenda? Because these items were not on tonight's agenda, the Commission cannot take action this evening. However, items may be added to a future agenda. Is there anyone present this evening that would like to speak on a non-agenda item? Hearing and seeing none, we'll move on to approval of the minutes. We have minutes for the Planning Commission meeting of September 3rd, 2020. Before we proceed, the chair would offer an amendment to the minutes of September 3rd under the title Village at Thunderbird Preliminary Plat, PP 20-03. The amendment reads as follows. Mr. Gary Livingston, who had spoken earlier in the meeting and had used his allotted 5 minutes, later attempted to disrupt the proceedings, was declared out of order and admonished by the chairman to conduct himself as a gentleman and allow the meeting to proceed. That is my motion, gentlemen. Is there a second on the amendment?
I'll second it.
We have a motion and a second. We'll now vote on the amendment only. Commissioner Nyberg.
Aye.
Commissioner Crow.
Aye.
Commissioner Lennox. Excuse me, Vice Chair Lennox. Commissioner Harper.
Aye.
Commissioner Nowakowski.
Aye.
The motion has passed and the amendment is added to the minutes of September 3rd, 2020. Do we have a motion for approval of the minutes as amended?
So moved.
Is there
I'll
a second?
that.
We have a motion and a second for approval of the minutes as amended. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Excuse me, any opposed? The motion is passed. Thank you, gentlemen. Ms. Collins, do we have any continuances or withdrawals?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We do not. However, I did want to mention that I neglected to mention we have additional staff here. Lizette Camacho and a team of people are here to talk about bond election information at the conclusion of the zoning cases that you're hearing this evening.
Great, thank you. Welcome to you all. We'll now move on to our public hearing items. I believe we have 2 public hearing items this evening. The purpose of a public hearing is to provide interested parties an opportunity to present testimony for the Commission's consideration. We will follow the same procedure for each item. The chair will call the application number and the name of the applicant. Staff will present their report and answer questions from the Commission. The applicant will be given an opportunity to make a presentation and answer questions from the Commission. Other persons who wish to testify will be asked to do so and answer questions from the Commission. The applicant will have an opportunity for closing comments. Staff will be asked for any final comments on the application and procedural guidance. The chair will then close the public hearing and ask for a motion prior to discussion. If you wish to speak on an item, you'll need to state your name and address for the record. Please be brief and to the point and avoid repetition. The chair does reserve the right to limit the length of your testimony. All exhibits shown to the Commission become part of the permanent record and must be submitted for the file. Okay, we have 2 public hearing items this evening, and the first is Urbanite at Zanjero, conditional use permit CUP 20-09. Ms. Tabitha Perry presenting. Good evening.
Good evening, Chairperson and Commissioners. The applicant, Earl Curley, PC, submitted application CUP 20-09 for approval of a conditional use permit to allow a continuing care retirement mixed-use facility for skilled nursing to include independent living, assisted living, and memory care in the Zanjero PAD zoning district. The 7.5-acre site is generally located north of Glendale Avenue between 91st and 95th Avenues and is in the Yucca district. The vicinity map provides general context to the site location in comparison to City Hall. This aerial photograph provides context of the subject site and immediate surrounding area. The subject site is located behind the existing Paula Verde Cancer Center. Cabela's is located northwest of Glendale Avenue and Zanjero Boulevard. The photograph does not depict developed or under construction developments, which are multifamily, a hotel, and commercial spaces located more or less south of the curvature of Zanjero Boulevard and a recently approved Sparrow development for active senior living located east of the subject site. The subject site is zoned PAD, Planned Area Development. The PAD allows the proposed land use subject to approval of the conditional use permit. In 2015, Planning Commission approved a conditional use permit to allow 172 units for a skilled nursing, medical, and healthcare facility. The applicant is requesting a maximum of 300 units for a continuing care retirement mixed-use facility comprising of an existing 3-story building, a new projected 6-story building, a new 1-story building, and a new maintenance building. The conceptual site plan depicts the proposed buildings, highlighted in yellow, and the non-highlighted area represents existing buildings which was built and remained vacant since 2007. The developer intends to provide a main entrance along Zanjero Boulevard and will utilize the existing drive aisle as a secondary access point. This conceptual landscape plan depicts the proposed main access point with the secondary one Ghost Inn. The applicant completed the requirements of the citizen participation process, and to date, the applicant nor staff has received any comments. Regarding findings and staff analysis, the proposed general plan land use designation is consistent with the approved zoning district. The proposed land use is permitted in the Zanjero PAD zoning district subject to CUP approval by Planning Commission. If the request is not approved, the site could still be developed per the approved 2015 CUP application for 172 units. The proposal would not be detrimental to the surrounding land uses. The proposed land use would generate less traffic volume than the initial proposed office land use. There is adequate street circulation to support the project as proposed. Based on the maximum number of units, the site will have adequate parking to accommodate residents and employees. The city development team has reviewed and recommended approval of the application with stipulations. These stipulations are outlined in the staff report and summarized as: development shall be in substantial conformance with the project narrative and site plan, date stamped received September the 2nd, 2020. A design review application is required for approval. Number 2, an existing public water line shall be conveyed to the city via an easement. Number 3, and this one is a little long, it covers 3 slides. The existing landscape irrigation system is being metered through a hydrant meter connected to the city portable water system. The developer shall coordinate efforts with the Cancer Center or independently connect to the city's portable water system. Thus, no certificate of occupancy shall be issued until the hydrant meter is no longer being utilized for this development. Number 4, the independent living use shall remain a component of the overall proposed continuing care retirement community for tenants classified as senior citizens as defined by federal regulations. Number 5, development shall comply with the approved standards within the Zanjero PAD and the engineering, design, and construction standards as approved or amended by the city. And number 6, relocation or a proposed pedestrian nod shall require approval from the Planning Division. Commissioners, that concludes my presentation. I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Ms. Perry. Commissioners, do we have questions? Commissioner Nowakowski.
On recommendation number 4, in terms of senior citizens as defined by federal regulations, what age is that? I'm just curious.
Chairperson and Commissioners, that is defined as 55 and older.
All right, I'm almost there. Thank you, Tabitha.
You're welcome.
Well past it.
Any additional questions? So this property has been, the landscape irrigation system's been on a hydrometer since 2007, is that?
Chairperson, that is correct.
Holy smokes. Wow, okay.
Some of the commissioners may recall that when the site was developed, then the recession happened, so the site wasn't completed with all the construction. So a lot of the landscaping was already put into place. So the city did not want for the vegetation to die, so we allowed the connection to our to the hydrant meter. but that was not the initial intent. So with this development coming in and working with the applicant, the decision was made that as they develop the site, that they need to find a means to have the landscape irrigation without being attached to the hydrant meter.
No, makes good sense. It's just a long time on a so-called temporary setup. So glad that's solved. Any additional questions? Okay, well, thank you, Ms. Perry. Would the applicant or applicant's representative like to come forward and make presentation? Good evening.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the Planning Commission. Rick Torres with the law firm of Earl and Curley on behalf of our client Urbanite here tonight to answer any questions on the use permit. As you already know, we gave you a pretty detailed 13-page narrative, and with staff's excellent presentation and the staff report, we are hoping you have enough information to make a recommendation for approval tonight on this case. Staff did a great job in the staff report outlining the specific items that were necessary to identify what uses needed or what stipulations needed to be occurred. We're in agreement with staff stipulations as written today. I want to be respectful of your time tonight. Unless you want a specific presentation from me, I'm here to answer any questions for you.
We were hoping for the 3-hour dissertation, but
It's all billable, so I'd be happy to, I'd be happy to do it. It's all billable.
okay. Commissioners, do we have any questions? Okay, Commissioner Nowakowski.
Rick, just one inquiry. Because the site is located right next to the casino, last meeting, we had an issue with an applicant not being able to talk to the casino. Did that come in play at all in this case? Did you need to talk to the casino?
Mr. Chairman, members of the Planning Commission, Commissioner Nowakowski, at this point, we haven't started negotiations or discussions with the casino as it relates to potential another or third access point to their site. Obviously, it would benefit us, and because our clients or our tenants would be able to get easier access to the casino, but it's not necessary or required. If our client decides to down the road, we certainly will entertain those options.
All right, thank you. And couldn't complete it during the recession. Now we're in a pandemic, and I really compliment you all to go forward with this kind of project. The vision, I think, is really good. And I like the diversity, the senior housing continuum of care. I just want to share that. So thank you.
Thank you
for putting this. And I hope the architectural, integrity is the same as what's there in Zanjero. It's pretty remarkable what was built, started to be built, not completed then.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Appreciate you coming in.
Thank you.
The chair will now open the public hearing for Urbanite at Zanjero Conditional Use Permit CUP 20-09. The chair has received 0 speaker cards. Is there anyone here this evening that would like to speak on this item? Anyone here would like to speak on this item? Hearing and seeing none, the chair now closes the public hearing on Urbanite at Zanjero Conditional Use Permit CUP 20-09. Commissioners, is there a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move to approve CUP 20-09 per the findings and stipulation, subject to the stipulations contained in the staff report.
Second.
We have a motion for approval subject to the 6 staff recommended stipulations and a second. The chair will now conduct a roll call vote. Again, on my far right, Commissioner Nyberg,
Aye.
Commissioner Crow,
Aye.
Vice Chair Lennox,
Aye.
Commissioner Harper,
Aye.
Commissioner Nowakowski,
Aye.
and the chair votes aye. The motion has passed. Mr. Gruber, what are the next steps in the process?
Chair, members of the commission, your action with respect to case number CUP 20-09 is final, subject to a written appeal received within 15 days.
Thank you. We'll now move on to public hearing item number 2, Desert River 2 Minor General Plan Amendment and Rezoning Application. We have GPA 20-07 and ZON 20-112. We'll hear the case contiguous, but there'll be two separate motions and votes on these items. Good evening.
Good evening, Mr. Commissioner and Commissioners. My name is Edward Vigil. I'm a planner with the City of Glendale, and again, I'm introducing minor general plan amendment 20-07 and zoning case 20-12 for Desert River 2. So the first request is a minor general plan amendment from business park to entertainment mixed use. And the second request is a zone change from Desert River PAD to Desert River 2 PAD. The overall project size is about 66 acres. Here we have the vicinity map showing the site in relation to City Hall. As you can see, it's off of 99th Avenue, west of City Hall. Next is a general plan map showing the designation of business park. And then we have a zoning map showing that the entire site as a PAD, which was approved in 2008. Here we have an aerial of the site, just south of Northern Avenue and west of 99th Avenue, adjacent to the 101 freeway. This is a preliminary site plan showing the proposed uses on 6 different parcels with a private road in between. Next, we have the original Desert River PAD, which shows all of the parcels that were originally approved in 2008. So for public involvement, the citizen involvement, notice was mailed on June 12th to property owners within 300 feet regarding the neighborhood meeting, which was held virtually on June 30th. The site was posted on September 10th. The hearing and request was advertised on October 8th in the Glendale Star. And as of today, no comments have been received from planning or the applicant. So the PAD proposal would result in a quality development product which is consistent with the goals and objectives of the general plan by ensuring that the mixed-use projects provide urban clusters with housing, retail, restaurants, and integrated transit facilities in Glendale. Staff is recommending approval with 7 stipulations. So the first stipulation would be conformance to the Desert River 2 PAD dated September 9th, 2020. And number 2, as part of the master developer improvements, the power lines along 99th Avenue shall be placed underground. Number 3, the developer shall work with the city and SRP BOR for any required land rights for roadway improvements on 99th Avenue in areas designated as USA fee or easement land. And number 4, the proposed lift station and force main shall be private. However, the developer shall work with the Master Water Services Department to ensure the proposed design mitigates potential odor and unnecessary maintenance issues for the operating entity in the future. And number 5, the developer shall grant and record a navigation easement to the City of Glendale Municipal Airport for the site per the content and the form prescribed by the city attorney. The developer shall create and incorporate a section within the community, CCNRs, or residential leases or regulations that clearly define the airport nuisance, aircraft noise, and overflight issues. This shall be completed and approved by the City of Glendale prior to the final approval of construction documents and/or issuance of permits. And number 7, the developer shall provide documentation to the city prior to the final approval of construction documents and/or issuance of permits that Form 7460-1 has been filed for the development with the Federal Aviation Administration, and the development received a no-hazard determination. If temporary equipment used during construction exceeds the height of the permanent structure, a separate Form 7460-1 shall be submitted to the FAA and a no-hazard determination obtained prior to the construction start date. And with that, that concludes my presentation. If you have any question, I'd be more than happy to answer those for you.
Okay, to clarify, we've got 6 stipulations, is that correct?
Did I skip one?
I only have
7.
6.
Right, I thought I heard you say 7 in the presentation, so I just wanted to make sure I
I
understood.
did say 7. I don't see number 6 in here.
You read number 6 as number 7.
Yeah, take your time, no worries.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Chairman.
Ms. Collins?
I think we combined 2 of them. There were 7 initially, and then regarding the airport issue, they were combined, so there's 6.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, that is correct. There's actually 6, not 7. My
Okay.
mistake.
No worries. Commissioners, do we have questions? Okay, the chair has a question relative to the lift station. Can't stray too far from this microphone. The lift station shall be private, and how common is that a lift station is private as opposed to in the public domain?
You know, I am not trained in engineering, so those
Okay,
comments came
no.
from Land Development Engineering, Jamie Chapin.
Uh-huh.
I can email her tomorrow morning and try to find the
I was
answer to
just
that.
curious if that's a common phenomenon. Most of the lift stations I've been acquainted with have been city-operated or by the municipal utility. So I was just curious. Yeah, I'd be curious for an answer. I don't think it affects my vote here this evening, but I would be just kind of curious as to
Okay,
how often that occurs.
I can make a note of that and find the
Yeah,
answer
I appreciate
tomorrow.
that. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Commissioners, any questions? Okay. Do we have an applicant or applicant's representative this evening?
Yes, the applicant Shelby Duplessis is here, and then she's available for questions.
Okay, great. Thank you, Mr. Vigil. Appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Good evening.
Good evening. Thank you so much, Mr. Chair and Commissioners. My name is Shelby Duplessis with Empire Group. Do you need my address? 6617 North Scottsdale Road, Suite 101 in Scottsdale, Arizona.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm not going to waste your time with a presentation either. Staff has done a great job. We've worked very closely with Ed and Tabitha and then the rest of staff. I can answer your question, though. The lift station, typically the major lift stations that serve the city or public, the city does not want to be responsible for the cost and maintenance or the work that goes into maintaining lift stations that are used for the developments. And so where we need a lift station, which we hate to ever build, actually,
Right.
Obviously for obvious reasons, where it is required, we actually agree and maintain that lift station. However, we build that to the city standards in the event that there ever becomes a future issue with the lift station, that it's already up to par, if you will, with what the city requirements are, so that when they have to come in, if they ever had to come in, I've never heard of that, but just in the event that they do, then it's up to par and they can easily come in and take over. So we'll be working with the city through that, and we are continuing to work through all of the other engineering and design requirements, and are very excited to be working with staff on that and to see a lot of excitement for the site. We actually already have 2 buyers for 2 of the parcels, so we're excited to see some movement out here, and again, are just appreciative of your time tonight and staff's, and to be up here and answering any questions that you might have.
Commissioners, any questions? Commissioner Crowe?
Shelby,
Yes.
who is specifically responsible for the lift station?
So we'll actually create a master association, and that will then be funded through the, each of the owners of the 6 parcels. And there'll be one master manager of that association paid in by each individual parcel owner. And that will be part of the CC&Rs and development agreement.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any additional questions? Okay, thanks for
Okay.
coming in. Very
Thank
much
you.
appreciated. The chair will now open the public hearing on GPA 20-07 and ZON 20-112. The chair has received no speaker cards. Is there anyone here this evening that would like to speak on these items? Anyone here wish to speak on these items? Hearing and seeing none, the chair will now close the public hearing on Desert River 2 minor general plan amendment and zoning application GPA 20-07 and ZON 20-12. Commissioners, is there a motion?
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Nyberg.
I would move approval of GPA 20-07.
We have a motion and a second for approval of GPA 20-07. The chair will now conduct a roll call vote, beginning on my far right with Commissioner Nyberg,
Aye.
Commissioner Crow,
Aye.
Vice Chair Lennox,
Aye.
Commissioner Harper,
Aye.
Commissioner Nowakowski.
Aye.
And the chair votes aye. The motion is passed. Mr. Gruber, next step in the process.
Chair and members of the commission, your action with respect to case number GPA 20-07 is not final. Your recommendation will be forwarded to the council for further consideration.
Thank you. We'll now move on to ZON 20-12. Is there a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move approval for ZON 20-12, subject to the 6 stipulations contained in the staff report.
I'll second that.
We have a motion and a second for approval of ZON 20-12, subject to the 6 stipulations as outlined in the staff report. The chair will now conduct a roll call vote, beginning on my far right. Commissioner Nyberg,
Aye.
Commissioner Crow,
Aye.
Vice Chair Lennox,
Aye.
Commissioner Harper,
Aye.
Commissioner Nowakowski.
Aye.
And the chair votes aye. The motion is passed. Mr. Gruber, what's the next step in the process?
Chair and members of the commission, like its companion case, case number ZON 20-12 is not final. Your recommendation will be forwarded to the city council for further consideration.
Okay, thank you very much. Ms. Collins, we have other business this evening.
No, Mr. Chairman, just the information on the bond.
Okay, then we shall hear the Bond Commission. Lisette is presenting. Don't be afraid.
I think, actually, we're both going to present.
Oh, no, the double whammy. You- Okay.
So I'm going to start. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Vicki. Oh, hang on a second. I tried moving this and the whole thing popped out a second ago, so I don't want that to happen again. My name is Vicki Rios. I'm one of the assistant city managers here with City of Glendale. And I'm going to have Lisette advance my slides for me there, but we have a presentation for you on the bond election. This presentation, well, first of all, I'd like to recognize Mr. Hirsch. He was part of our bond committee. We did have a bond committee, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that. And before I get started, I also want to remind everyone that the purpose of this presentation is to provide information about the bond program and the election. By law, city staff cannot advocate for a yes or no vote on the bonds or tell you our opinions on the bond election. We're just here to provide information only. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the work of the bond committee, some background on general obligation bonds, which you'll hear me sometimes called GO bonds. Excuse me. The relationship between GO bonds and property taxes, and the city's model for funding the full general obligation bond program. The presentation takes about 20 minutes, but if you have a question, just try to get my attention and wave at Lisette or someone, and we'll stop and answer your question as we go. So the bond committee consisted of 7 of your fellow Glendale residents, 1 member from each district, and 1 member at large appointed by the mayor. And as we said, Mr. Hirsch was also part of that committee. They had a series of informational meetings and presentations starting in November. They heard from the city's financial advisors from RBC Capital Markets, and RBC Capital Markets talked about the city's current debt profile. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit later also. They had a presentation from the city's bond counsel or bond attorney to cover legal aspects of the bonds. In December, they covered the election process and the timeline of the election process, and also the capital improvement plan. So for the information and of yourselves and anyone who may be watching, what is a capital improvement plan? Capital improvements are non-routine expenditures that cost more than $50,000 and last more than 5 years. And as part of the city's budget process, every year the council prepares a 10-year capital plan. We also sometimes call that the CIP, which serves as a roadmap for projects in the city. The plan identifies the resources that will be used to pay for the projects, including GO bond funding, which is the one that we're talking about today, but also cash, development impact fees, bonds with other types of revenue sources, and other types of financing sources. I think it's important to note that the city doesn't use financing for maintenance or operations, only for capital, and it doesn't use bond financing in particular to pay for projects or items that don't last at least as long as the life of the bond. So for example, the city wouldn't issue a 25-year bond to pay for a vehicle or something like that that's only going to last 5 to 10 years. The bond committee continued its work in January of 2020. They had presentations from the landfill, flood control, parks, general government facilities like police and fire stations, the library, and streets and transit. While they learned, as you will a little bit later, about all the projects that are planned to be bond financed, actually all the projects in the city. And while the bond committee could have potentially recommended ballot questions for all of these types of projects, they decided to recommend council refer 4 questions to the voters. The bond committee felt that the other areas that they had looked at had enough voter authorization for the time being. The bond committee also drafted potential ballot language and recommended the 4 ballot questions to the council. Now, ultimately, it's up to the council to decide if they want to refer those questions to the voters, and they did that in June of 2020 with just some minor changes from the bond committee's recommended ballot language. So that leads us to the 4 questions that are represented here at a very high level by this infographic. And later in the program, you'll see Lisette is going to go into more detail and the directors on the specific projects. For this presentation, I'm just focused kind of on the financial aspects of the bonds. And next up, we have a video, so Ms. Camacho is going to play that for you.
Hi, I'm Mike Harris. Have you ever seen bond questions on an election ballot and you weren't quite sure what you were voting on or really even what a bond is? Well, on November 3rd, Glendale voters will have 4 bond questions on their ballot. This bond election is part of a general election. The last Glendale bond election was a special election 13 years ago in 2007. And because the results of local elections have an impact on our residents' daily lives and their vote gives us an important indication about their desires regarding what they want for their city, I'm here to walk us through some information about what this means. So what are bonds? Bonds are debt, like your home mortgage, the city uses to finance large construction projects like parks and streets. The city sells bonds to investors to generate cash for the projects and then pays the investors back with interest over a period of 20 to 25 years. Financing with bonds is a way to build parks, storm drains, streets, and the landfill so that residents now and in the future pay for it a little at a time. And why do we need a bond election now? The additional bond authority will allow the city to complete major projects. Most of the projects to be financed involve replacing aging infrastructure. The city plans to renovate and upgrade citywide parks, arterial streets, and storm drainage. The landfill plans to expand to meet the needs of the community. Who pays for bonds and what is the source of revenue to pay them? The landfill bonds are expected to be paid for by landfill revenues. All the other bonds will be paid for with property taxes on residential, commercial, industrial, and agricultural properties in the city. The city is paying off older bonds, and with proper financial planning, the new bonds could be paid for with the same tax levy as the old bonds. Remember, voting gives you a voice and a choice about this important issue. A more detailed list of proposed projects is available on the city's website at www.glendaleaz.com/bond2020. And it's also in the voter information packet, which will be mailed to all registered voters.
Okay, so that's a little bit of information about bonds. I'm going to tell you a little bit more specifically about general obligation bonds. General obligation bonds are a type of bond which is usually paid for using revenue generated by secondary property tax. Because the bonds can impact property tax rates, by law, they must be authorized by the voters. They're also subject to Arizona constitutional limits, which you can see on this slide. The limits are related to the amount of debt outstanding, which means outstanding means it has not yet been paid off or retired. Remember, as we saw in the video, bonds get paid off a little bit at a time. The constitutional limit says the amount outstanding, which was used to finance water, sewer, public safety, streets, transportation, open space, and parks, cannot be more than 20% of the limited assessed valuation of all the properties in the city. And the constitutional limit says that the amount outstanding for general municipal purposes like city hall buildings and libraries and things like that cannot be more than 6% of the limited assessed valuation of all the properties in the city. The important thing about this right now is that Glendale's outstanding debt is not currently close to either of those limits. And as we said earlier, or you heard in the video, the city is paying off or retiring some older bonds, which creates capacity to issue new debt. However, we are required to tell you that the amount of the proposed bond authorization combined with the current outstanding debt would exceed the city's constitutional debt limit. But as we've said, and you heard in the video and I said before, the city is paying off some existing debt that will keep the amount of outstanding bonds below the constitutional debt limits. And we can assure you that no bonds can or will be issued that would cause the city to exceed the constitutional debt limit. Now, before we talk about the specific financial impacts of these bonds on property taxes, we thought it would be important to talk a little bit about property taxes in general. The city's property tax has two portions: the primary levy and the secondary levy. The primary levy can be used for any purpose, and so in our case, we deposit that into the general fund for operations. The secondary levy can only be used to pay general obligation debt, which is the type of debt that we're talking about in this presentation. This slide also says that the city's policy is to keep the levy flat. And what we mean by that is that the amount of revenue generated by the tax stays about the same every year and only grows by the value of new construction within the city. So on this slide, we have 7 years of history of Glendale's secondary property tax levy. And as you can see, the amount collected every year remains relatively the same. It does increase slightly, and again, that increase is due to growth from new properties being added to the tax rolls every year. Every individual person or property's taxes may change up or down slightly as the value of their property changes, but under this policy, the amount of total revenue that the city receives only increases by the amount of that new property that's being added to the tax rolls. As part of the information we're required to disclose, the city prepared an analysis of the impact on a property tax bill if the voters authorize all 4 questions on the ballot. Now, this analysis really depends on what interest rate you assume you will pay to the investors who buy the bonds. And actual interest rates are determined by the bond market. And as you probably know, rates right now are at historic lows. In some cases, they're as low as 1%. The ballot questions, however, say that the maximum rate could be 8%. So we know the maximum rate that they would be issued at would be 8%. That's a high and very conservative number. For the analysis below that you see here, and in the voter information packet, you'll see it as well. The city's financial advisor, along with the city, used a 5% interest rate. That's also, we think, a conservative number, but it takes into account that we don't know, again, what the interest rate is going to be when we actually issue the bonds. We won't know that until the market conditions at the time the bonds are issued. So as you can see here, the impact on a tax bill for a residence valued at $250,000 would be $172.44 a year. That's about $3.30 a week, or less than 50 cents a day. The impact on an industrial property valued at $1 million is $1,241.52. Again, this is assuming that the bonds are issued at a 5% interest rate. And the impact on an agricultural or vacant property valued at $100,000 is $103.44. As I said before, we're required to disclose this information, but just hang on to this thought because I'm going to show you in a few minutes that we have a plan that we think demonstrates how the city could issue the debt without these tax impacts. Again, partly because actual interest rates are expected to be lower than the 5%, and also because we're paying off some older debt. And with proper financial planning, you'll see that the new bonds could be issued using the same tax levy as the old bonds. Now, you may be thinking to yourself, but hey, my property tax bill is much higher than $172.44. This graphic we created is meant to show you the components that make up a typical property tax bill. The bill is actually comprised of taxes for schools, the city's primary and secondary levies, which you can see there at about 4% and 14%, and special districts and the county. And as you can see, depending on the value of the property, the city's portion of this property tax bill is generally around, somewhere around 18 to 20% of the total bill. This is an actual property tax bill for a Glendale home valued at about $250,000. And out of the $2,000 of taxes being paid annually, you can see in red there that the Glendale secondary property tax is about $274 a year. This is the amount which is currently being used to pay this type of general obligation bond debt. And again, as we're required to disclose, if the voters were to authorize all of the bonds and the questions, that bill could go up by $172.44, assuming the bonds are sold at a 5% interest rate. For a commercial property, the city's portion of the tax bill is typically less than 10% of the total bill. This slide is an actual commercial property. We tried to find one as close to $1 million. The one we found was about $1.3 million. And as you can see, out of in this case, a $23,000 tax bill, about $1,860 a year is for Glendale secondary property tax, which is currently being used to pay for this type of general obligation debt. And again, as we talked about earlier, if the voters were to authorize all the bonds, that bill could go up by $1,241.52, assuming the bonds are sold at a 5% interest rate. And finally, we have an agricultural property. In this case, the city's portion of the tax bill is around 12%. And this is an actual tax bill for an agricultural property valued at about $160,000. And as you can see, out of, again, a $2,000 tax bill, about $200 a year is for Glendale secondary property tax, which is currently being used to pay this type of general obligation debt. And as we said earlier, if the voters were to authorize all 4 questions, that bill could go up by $103.44, assuming the bonds are sold at a 5% interest rate. So that kind of gives you all the required disclosures, but as we said earlier, the city has a plan to issue the debt while still keeping the property tax levy flat. So to analyze the impacts on the city with its advisors from RBC built a financial model for the entire general obligation bond program. And that program actually has 3 components. The first of the first 2 are on this slide. So we currently have debt outstanding that hasn't been paid off of $100.4 million. In addition to that, as you see on this slide, the city has a plan to issue about $200 million in additional general obligation bond debt over the next 10 years, but we already have voter authorization for that. So that's not part of what's on the ballot because it's been approved by voters in the past. And it's for things like you can see on this slide, public safety, streets and parking, government facilities, libraries, parks and recreation, open spaces, flood control, and cultural facilities. And then we have, let's go to the next slide. And then we have the third and final component, which is $178 million in new debt that's being requested to be authorized by the voters in this election. And that debt is also planned to be issued over a 10-year period. Now, in this case, we excluded the landfill debt from the full model because the intent is to pay for that with landfill user fees, in which case it will not impact property taxes. We have a financial model for the landfill as well, and in that model, we analyze the impact on landfill customers of issuance of these bonds. But the landfill's been planning ahead for that for several years, and so the model for the landfill shows no need to raise residential customer rates to pay for the bonds. So with all this I skipped ahead one, sorry. So again, the ability to finance this entire program depends on some assumptions. The first one is assuming that we keep a flat property tax levy, but it will grow some by the growth of that new construction. So we assumed it will grow about 1% a year for the first 10 years. And the reason we did that is because we look back historically and it's been growing by 1% per year for the past 10 years. And then beyond that, we made an assumption that it would grow by 0.5%. That's because it's further out and we just don't know. We will update it periodically every year with the actual results, but because it's further out, we made it a little bit lower and it's only 0.5%. And for this financial model, we assume the bonds would be issued at a 3.5% interest rate. The thing that determines the interest rate on the bonds will be the market again at the time that the bonds are issued. And we won't know exactly what that is until we sell the bonds. But we still think that this is a conservative estimate because, as I mentioned earlier, bonds are currently selling at historically low market rates, sometimes at close to 1%. But if interest rates were higher, then the city would just have to slow the program down and issue some of that debt later. So with all of that in mind and all those assumptions, this final graph I'm going to show you shows how the financial plan could work while still maintaining that flat levy. So the first component you see coming in the blue is the current general obligation bond debt. And this is where you can see, this is the payments that are being made every year. This is where you can see that some of that debt is being paid off in the next couple of years by 2023. And then you see now an orange section coming in. This orange section represents the payments on the second component I talked about, which is that $200 million in debt that is planned to be issued, but it's already been authorized by voters in past elections. And it's for things like public safety, streets and parking, government facilities, and libraries. And then finally, this gray portion you see coming in now represents the debt payments on the debt the city plans to issue with this new voter authorization. And as you can see, the model shows how with all three of those components added together, if you're assuming a 3.5% interest rate on the bonds, as the older debt is paid off and taking into account a slight growth in the levy as properties are added in the city could issue these new voter authorized bonds using the same tax levy as the old bonds. That's kind of indicated there by the green arrow. So I know that's a lot of information, and hopefully we made it relatively easy to understand. But if you have any additional questions, I'm going to pause now and see, and then if not, we'll go on to some other information and videos that Lisette is going to show you. Are there any questions we can answer? Doesn't look like it. Okay, go ahead, Lisette.
Good evening. We have 4 videos to show you on the 4 bond questions. Each video should take about 2 minutes each. And after each video, we'll have the department directors do a brief presentation on the proposed bond projects. Give me a minute to pull up the presentation here. The first video I'm going to show you is on the Parks and Recreation bonds.
Glendale's got a very robust park system. We have quite a few parks. A lot of them are neighborhood parks that are fairly small. And the infrastructure is just starting to have run its life cycle. Like irrigation systems, which is really essential for growing good trees and grass to make the parks look aesthetic and beautiful. And some like electricity to make the lighting system more efficient and improve the light quality throughout the park system. And then some of the amenities that sit on top of the park, whether it be a children's playground area, shade structures, or courts, updating the courts or replacing the courts. Sidewalks, and then amenities like ramadas, benches, walkways, all the things that you encounter when you go to a city park.
It reduces manual labor, it reduces staff having to actually go out to the park and investigate what's going on. They'll have the information in front of them and they can attack the problem head on as they get to the park.
Some projects are known and are already in the system that the council's considered, like the continuing development of Heroes Park. It's a major regional park on the west side of town. It's only partly developed. The next phase of that development is bringing a lake to the park. And the council and the bond committee have included that in this program to do that next phase. Another one would be the splash pad at O'Neill Park.
Star of the video, Mr. Jim Burke, will be doing a brief presentation on the proposed projects.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission. My name is Jim Burke, and I'm the Director of the Parks and Recreation Department here in Glendale. Question 1 on the ballot is for Parks and Recreation projects. This slide contains projects which were presented to the bond committee for consideration for the council to submit to the voters for a new bond authorization for Parks and Recreation. As you can see, the projects contained over $101 million in projects over the next 10 years, and the city has about $14 million in existing authorization for Parks and Recreation. As a result of that gap in funding, the bond committee recommended to council, and the council referred the question to voters for to obtain an additional $87.2 million to complete the 10-year capital plan, and council referred this question to voters. The ballot language specifies the funds can only be used to plan, construct, improve, renovate, remodel existing parks, recreation facilities within existing park boundaries. This means a particular bond authorization could not be used to buy land or build new parks. It also includes language that allow the equipping of parks with things like lighting, irrigation systems, structures, and restrooms. It is important to note that the bond funds can be used for any project allowed by the ballot language, which means the funding can be used for the projects that are listed on the previous pages, but it could also be used for any other project as long as it fits within the language in the ballot. With that, I'll be happy to answer any questions you might have about the parks question on the ballot.
Any questions, commissioners? Commissioner Nowakowski.
In regards to Heroes Park, it said the next phase of development would be to complete the lake. Now, Heroes Park has waited a long time for new development, after the library. Does this complete the development for Heroes Park, or is this just for the lake?
Commissioners, that one item is just for the lake. It will complete a lake in the southwest corner of the park, but it's an 80-acre property, and as you can see on the slide that Lisette just went back to, there's a build-out that's $46 million. That's intended to finish the rest of the park improvements, but those are scheduled to happen in years 6 through 10 of this 10-year program.
Thank you.
Additional questions? Okay, thanks, Jim.
Thank you.
The next video we have is on the streets bonds, and Mr. Trevor Ebersole will do a brief presentation on the proposed projects.
The pavement management program, we're about halfway through, a little bit more than halfway through with touching every street, all 748 miles of streets in the city. You remove all the asphalt, and then you're down to the base soil or the base dirt, if you will. And so sometimes you have to treat that. You have to dig that up. But if not, you just treat it with a cement stabilizer, and you replace the entire asphalt.
The $10.2 million in pavement management funding pays for surface maintenance, surface treatments for the 748 miles of roadways in Glendale. But arterial roadways carry a lot more traffic and get a lot more impact on them.
Arterials provide major connection points throughout the city and beyond, and they tend to carry much, much more traffic than, say, your residential streets or collector streets. with the bond money, we're going to be able to keep streets such as Camelback or other arterials in great working order.
Is it on now? Oh, sorry. Good evening, Chair and Commission members. I'm Trevor Ebersol, I'm the Director of Transportation, and I'll be talking with you about question number 2 on the ballot. And question 2 on the ballot is for streets. The next 3 slides contain the projects which were presented to the Bond Committee for consideration for the Council to submit to the voters for new bond authorization for construction and reconstruction of streets. As you saw in the video, the projects on these pages are for arterial streets, which are the main thoroughfares that carry heavier traffic within the city. And the projects would involve construction and reconstruction, which means taking the streets all the way down to the dirt level and rebuilding them. This gives the street a new life of about 30 years. As you can see here, the 10-year plan for construction and reconstruction of streets also includes $10 million per year for years 6 through 10. We separated those projects because they are not in the formal budget now, but they are projected future needs, which we will show on the next 2 pages. The total program is over $109 million, and the existing voter authority is about $25 million. As a result, the Bond Committee recommended Council refer this question to the voters to obtain an additional $81.5 million to complete the 10-year plan. This is the first of 2 pages showing the sample year 6 through 10 projects. As the city gets closer to year 6 of the plan, between now and 2025, these will be presented to the council for them to consider formally adding them to the city's capital improvement plan. Now, the ballot language specifies the funds can only be used to construct and reconstruct streets, highways, and bridges in the city, plus signage, lighting, and landscaping, and potentially to widen streets. Again, it is important to note that bond funds could be used for any project allowed by the ballot language, which means the funding can be used for the projects on the previous pages, but it could also be used for other projects as long as they fit within the language in the ballot. And at this point, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Commissioner Nyberg.
Yes, thank you. I have a question. So when you're talking about construction or reconstruction, I think you mentioned that means removing all the pavement, going right down to the dirt. Where does a project like a mill and overlay fall in? Is that a reconstruction? How is that classified?
Chair and Commissioners, it depends. A mill and overlay typically would be a maintenance item, depending on the depth that we have to go. If we have to get into the base layer at all, then that's considered a reconstruction.
So this bond language wouldn't cover projects like a mill and overlay?
Chair and Commissioners, it could. I would say that it could cover a mill and overlay because the mill and overlay would be classified as a reconstruction depending on the depth of which we go.
Thank you.
Any additional questions, Commissioners? Okay,
Thank you.
Trick question, Trevor. How many bridges do we have in town now?
Chair and Commissioners, we have about 42 bridges in Glendale.
That's right. Thank you.
At this point, I'd like to turn it over to Michelle Wojtanko, our Director of Field Operations.
The third video is on the landfill bonds, and Ms. Wojtanko will do a brief presentation on the proposed projects for the landfill.
current affair of the landfill right now, we're projecting to operate till about 2023 to 2024. That's the whole intent of the liner, is to stop any kind of contamination to the groundwater.
The initial layer will be this high-density polyethylene liner. It's approximately 60 times thicker than your garbage bag.
It traps any liquid waste that comes through the waste, and we pump it to a leachate system to contain it.
Approximately $2 million will be used to finish excavating the northern expansion area, and $8 million will be used for the liner. The bond allows current users of the landfill to pay for current use and not pay for future users of the landfill.
Sorry. Thank you, Mr. Camacho. Good evening, Chair and Commissioners. Thank you for allowing us some time tonight to introduce this to you. As Ms. Camacho or Mr. Ebersol said, I'm Michelle Watanko. I'm the Director of Field Operations here to discuss question 3 on the landfill tonight. This slide contains the projects which were presented to the Bond Committee for consideration for the Council to submit to the voters for the new bond authorization for the landfill. As you can see in the 10-year plan, has about $25 million in projects, but there's an existing authorization for about $15 million. The Bond Committee recommended Council refer this question to the voters to obtain the additional $9.9 million to complete the 10-year plan. The ballot language is very specific in that the funds can only be used to construct and extend the landfill. One unique element about the language is that while the city could use property tax revenue to pay for these bonds, the intent is to pay for them with landfill user fees. That completes question 3, and I'd be happy to answer any questions on the landfill.
Questions? Okay, thank you.
The last video we have is on the flood control bonds. Mr. Don Bessler is here to do a brief presentation on the proposed projects.
We've identified areas in the downtown area as well as other areas in the city that when we get just a typical rainfall event, we experience flooding in the streets, particularly at intersections.
When we get a big storm, what you'll see is the basins that hold water start to overflow.
In a larger event, we even have some intersections that we have to close the intersection. We will come in with a storm sewer system where we remove the runoff from the street. And fortunately, we have been building a network through the years, and so we have places to take these storm sewers. And what we're trying to do is gradually add on to that system. The main objective on our projects is to improve roadway travel during rain events for the traveling public and also for any pedestrian bicycle riders that might be using those roadways.
As Ms. Camacho introduced me, I'm Don Bessler with the Engineering Department. Chair and Commissioners, thank you for the opportunity to speak to this. This is question 4. It's our flood control program. I would just say, as you can see in the presentation, there's about $19 million worth of projects here. The staff that you saw in the video, Jamie Chapins and Kelly Hargaden, have been very aggressive about writing for grants. And in addition, we supplement this program with a rather aggressive grant program. We have about $7 million of approved grants at the county level right now that would help actualize this program. The 10-year plan here has, as I said, about $19 million worth of projects that would be bond funded. We have existing authority of about $9.7 million, and if approved, we would add another $9.3 million to that bond program. As a result, the committee recommended the full amount to the council to, for their consideration to be placed on the ballot. The language that the ballot describes is language that can be used for planning, constructing, equipping, acquiring, and installing flood control facilities. That could be joint facilities that we share with another jurisdiction regionally. It's for improvements to storm drain lines, to flood control channels, detention or retention basins, and the things that you saw described in the video. And with that, I'm concluding my part and am here also to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you. Commissioners, any questions? Okay, thank you, sir.
Well, we hope you enjoyed the presentations and the videos. That concludes our presentation. We'll be happy to answer if you have any final questions you may have.
Thank you. Any questions, commissioners? All right, well, thank you, Ms. Rios, and Ms. Camacho, thank you very much. We appreciate it. Okay, that brings us back to other business. On the agenda, we have Planning Commission Chair and Vice Chair recommendations for 2021. Does staff have anything to say on this item?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The city commissions are required to go through this process at this time every year, and so the commission generally, nominates a chair and a vice chair. So I would ask the chairman or the commissioners to move forward with that.
Okay, thank you very much. I believe there's two commissioners whose terms expire January 31st of 2022. Commissioner Wilfong and Commissioner Crow, I believe. Terms expire 2022. And the rest of us expire January 31st. There had been an email, which I assume you've all received from the city clerk, asking us to state any intention to seek reappointment by October the 5th. I personally have not responded to that inquiry as of yet. I don't know if any of the rest of you have or not. I don't know if I wanted to be reappointed, I don't know if I would be, quite frankly. That remains to be seen. We serve at the pleasure of the council. So with that, I'll open it to discussion, commissioners. Well, I'm personally, I'm a little uncomfortable thinking I probably won't be here, voting for a chairman that will serve probably new commissioners. I don't know how the rest of you feel about that, but, let's have some discussion here on this. Commissioner Crow, please.
Well, I know the job that you do. It is a lot of extra work, and you do a terrific job. But in order to take that seat, you have to be willing to take on the extra responsibility and the extra work to sit in that chair. So just so everybody knows, it's not a walk in the park like Gary makes it look.
I get a lot of help. Is there anyone who has decided they will be leaving the commission?
At this time, I don't know it myself either. Some of you know I have a wife with a condition. And it's, as she progresses in her disease, I may have to start stepping down of a lot of things I do. So right now, I don't know what I'm going to do either.
That's most unfortunate, Rick, and we're sorry.
Well, it is, but
Sorry to hear that. Is there anyone that would like to serve as chair? I'll put it that way, that would accept a nomination as chair.
sure will fall.
I would accept it if you're not going to be here.
Well, you know, I feel pretty strongly about positions rotating and things, and, you know, you're all very capable commissioners, so it's not like anybody is do I enjoy it? Yes, quite candidly. I've had a pretty good run. Staff has been wonderful. I've had plenty of support. I am a strong believer in rotating these positions, rotating participation on the commission. So, you know, quite candidly, I think I'm probably going to be departing. Not so much that I really don't want to serve or don't want to be here, but, you know, I'm just a really strong believer in seats rotating and different people having an opportunity. And so, you know, I think I'm moving on. I'd be very happy to support Commissioner Crow as chair. And if there's a motion to do that, why, Commissioner Nowakowski.
With that said, I'd be more than happy to nominate Commissioner Crow to serve as chair.
I'll second that.
We have a motion and a second to recommend Vern Crow as the incoming commission chair. All in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, the motion is passed, and I assume, Mr. Gruber, that goes as a recommendation to council, who would ultimately make the final decision.
Chair, members of the commission, yes, that's my understanding too.
Okay. And with that, we need a applicant or an interested party for vice chair. And so with that,
Mr. Chair, I think the current vice chair has done a outstanding job, and I would like to nominate him for another.
I don't know if I'm going to be staying on yet or not. I haven't made my decision. I've been on it for like 7 years.
well, and I certainly support your sentiment, Commissioner Nyberg. Al has been a terrific vice chair, a lot of help, and
You're here.
he helps. He makes the chair position look pretty easy because he does a lot to help out. Is there anyone that would be interested in stepping forward and taking the position? Vern, you're out of the running now, so.
How about Ed?
I would be willing to help out.
Well, I would enthusiastically support a motion for Commissioner Nyberg as vice chair.
So move.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to recommend Commissioner Nyberg as incoming vice chair. And we'll now ask for a vote. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? The motion has passed, and that recommendation will go to council. So with that, do we have a planning staff report?
No, Mr. Chairman, we do not.
Oh, please. Been waiting with bated breath.
I apologize. I'll do better next time.
Well, it's not like you don't have anything to do. Commissioners, do we have comments, suggestions? Okay, well, the chair will just make my usual plea that it is still amazingly warm out there. It's very hot, very dry. If you have pets that are outside, just remember they're there and make sure they have shade and adequate water. And with that, we'll call for a, oh, yes, thank you. Our next meeting of the Planning Commission is November 5th, 6 p.m. at the Glendale Civic Center. And so we'll call for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Support.
We have a motion and a second for adjournment. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? We are adjourned.